Welcome to RISmedia's From Settlement to Success, How Industry Leaders Will Innovate and Grow After the Lawsuits. I'm John Featherston, the CEO and founder of RISmedia, and it's my distinct pleasure to have you join us today in what I believe will be an extremely interesting and thought-provoking hour geared to help you and your businesses rise up and be better equipped to succeed in these challenging times. As real estate professionals, we truly are living in interesting and challenging times. Just a few days ago in Washington, D.C., a packed house of more than 500 real estate brokers participated in another RISmedia event, our annual Power Broker Forum at the NAR Spring Conference. At that meeting, more than 500 plus real estate professionals overwhelmingly stated that they believed there were significant opportunities ahead of them this year. However, to seize these opportunities, they know they must overcome the challenges and the forced changes that we now face due to the legal settlements. To help us better understand how to meet these challenges, how to best innovate and lead, and be a thought leader in your respective markets, RISmedia is proud to welcome 4 of our industry's most respected leaders today, including Ken Trepeta, the President and Chief Director of RESPRO, Michele Harrington, the COO of First Team Real Estate in Southern California, Art Carter, the CEO of the California Regional MLS, CRMLS, the largest MLS in the country, and along with my co-moderator, Matt Ferrera, philosopher, author, speaker, and leader of the Learning Network. All 4 will explore the ways that they're applying innovation, effective business practices, steady leadership to drive positive outcomes for their agents, industry colleagues, and consumers in this new normal that we face. Now, to get started, obviously, there's a tremendous amount of concern surrounding these settlement-triggered changes on deck for our industry this coming summer. Truly an obstacle to be addressed and solved if we are to move forward, succeed, innovate, and grow. We have a lot to discuss today, so let's get started. Let's welcome Matt Ferrera, my co-moderator for today. Matt, let's get rolling.
All right, thank you so much, John. I'm looking forward to a great conversation with our guests today. And again, a special thank you to our guests for taking the time to share their insights, their experiences, and their guidance. One of the things that is an immediate silver lining of the times we find ourselves in is that leaders like the ones we have on today's session step forward and help provide some guidance and encouragement for us to be able to make some sense, but also create some opportunity out of what's been going on. And John, I just want to also thank you for hosting this session in the spirit of optimism, the spirit of potential and possibility, because so many of the people who are watching, so many of our colleagues in this industry, I think have rightfully gone through a sense of shock, a sense of denial, even a sense of the injustice of some of the circumstances that triggered to where we are today, and are now beyond that. They're moving past that sense of what went wrong towards a mindset of discovering what can go better, what can go well in the future. And so I'm super excited to have this conversation and grateful that at times like these, leaders like the ones on this call, and to be fair, also all the participants, everyone who is tuning in, taking time out of their day to absorb these ideas, make them their own, and hopefully pass them along to their colleagues, their clients, the public, and the industry as a whole, so we can get better. So let me just jump right into the conversation here, because in this industry, we have a phrase, I think like many industries, around business as usual. Is this a period of business as usual? Where ironically, business as usual in our business has always been about improving the business. That's what we do. We are masters of change in this business. Every salesperson knows it. Every broker knows it. Nobody has changed more in the last 30 years that I've been in this business than the real estate industry has. So we're going to try and take a look at how this period, triggered by the settlements, if you will, has become an accelerant for us in the industry to do what we've always done: adapt, overcome, and advance ourselves. And I'm going to just jump right in, and I'm going to ask Ken first the following question, which is sort of, can you, let's start with the end in mind. Let's actually fast forward 12 months from now. Let's fast forward 24 months from now. And we're having a conversation. We're at the next NAR mid-year meeting, or two meetings from now. Do you envision a time when we're going to be able to look back at some point and see this moment in a more welcome light and a less feared light? Being able to say, you know what, the industry adapted quickly enough and made some significant changes to unlock even more potential than they expected. And if so, what might some of that look like, Ken?
So I said at the very beginning, first of all, as an attorney myself, I still have to say this, and you alluded to this, I never thought much of this as a legal case. I don't really think anybody was really doing anything that was antitrust, but as people observe, things have changed in the legal system. There's all kinds of craziness going on there, and juries can find the craziest thing, and there's so many expenses related with litigation that I wouldn't assume that anybody settling a case is really admitting they were wrong or really thinks they were wrong in what they were doing. It's just the way things have become. Having said that, the first thing I said, the first comment I gave to anyone, was that I really believed that folks can adapt to this. I think that the critical element here is, there's a lot of hype in the media, and it's particularly the trade media. And I was thinking about that earlier. Why should it be different than anything else? Don't trust the first thing you hear. You've always got to look and look deeper and find out what really happened. Well, the main thing that's happened here is that an offer of compensation can't be on the MLS. It can be anywhere else. It's not changing the model necessarily that most folks have operated under. It just, or getting rid of the model. It's making a kind of minor change that I feel like was the way it was probably 30 years ago before this rule happened anyway. And so I'm prefacing this with a lot of other information just to say that commissions have gone down. It depends on the market. As prices of homes have gone up, will this affect commissions? Perhaps. Is there potentially more to negotiate? Perhaps. But I think what you'll come out with is that you'll have, I use the term listing agent, the seller's agents will be in a position where they will probably, they will be making a case that there should be an offer of compensation because it does help get you more eyes on your property, better offers. This is like a calculus equation. I think people just assume that, well, if the seller's not making the offer of compensation, that they're going to save money. But, if I'm on the other end of it, I might say, well, my buyer can't afford to pay this commission, so I need a concession from you. People can see where this goes, that it's, it winds up being a wash and not this, this situation where you're going to see these dramatic drops in commissions or whatever it is. I think, the market will evolve. And I think, that's what we trust in this country. We trust in markets. This is not, the Soviet Union. So sure. I think you'll see a point in the future where, there's going to have to be a lot more educating of consumers about the benefits of how you handle dealing with buyers and dealing with their agents, and the benefits and everything like that. And there might be choices, and there might be deviations from it, and there might be downward pressure on commissions. But as I said, there already is, as prices have gone up and depending on the market. But I just see, more educated real estate agents making a better case for their value proposition a year from now, and probably not a huge difference in the way business is done in most areas. So that's kind of my 2-minute take, 5-minute take, whatever it is.
It's a good way to kick us off, and I appreciate that. I wrote down two things I just want to highlight for the audience. It's an equation, not a zero-sum game. I really like that. I like how this is a mindset of we just need to adjust certain variables and business will continue on. Ken, as you and I both know, dozens of states have had mandatory buyer agency representation and compensation agreements for decades. And so there are a lot of brokers within the sound of our voice who are saying, everybody calm down. Like, if you need to know how to do this, come for a visit and we'll help you as fellow realtors, as fellow professionals, figure that piece out. And then additionally, there are going to be some benefits, as you point out. Consumers will get more information, more disclosure, see more of the reasoning behind certain recommendations, like offering compensation to encourage buyers agents to promote the property to their spheres of influence, to their networks, and it may turn out, in fact, in some markets we already have some evidence of this, that not as big of a deal as we thought. And as you said, maybe we're just going to have to change our communication style, not necessarily our information flow. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Let me jump over to Michele here for a moment. Michele, as a leader of an organization, of a brokerage firm that looks at this and says, okay, it's a shift in the landscape, but it's not tilting the landscape so dramatically. How are you and your firm looking at this as a moment, a signal, a trigger for growth, whether that is by enhancing the talent that you have, the natural abilities and the skills of your people, changing your service proposition, attracting additional talent? How are you looking at this, not as the sky is falling, but full thrusters on our rocket ship here? We're gonna just bypass the moon and go all the way for the better planets in this case.
Yeah, I mean, I think with every obstacle, just in the business or in life in general, with every obstacle, there's an opportunity, right? So you can look at this as being, a terrible thing. And I think I want to preface it with saying, I do think that the settlement itself and the fact that the DOJ got involved in our industry and the fact that our federal government is so huge that the DOJ got involved in our industry, and the fact that antitrust was set up for companies that were bigger than the US government, like Standard Oil and the American Steel. It wasn't set up to interfere in personal contracts between pretty small companies and people, because the average brokerage in the US is 3 people, 3 licensees. These are small businesses that have private contracts. So somehow we got so far gone that we are interfering in personal contracts between people. So there is a lot of anger in the industry. I feel the anger that it's unjust, the anger that NAR settled. All that is definitely what I feel, and what I feel from other brokers and other leaders. So there's that, there's can we fix our system, in general, so that we can run a business without interference from the government and greedy lawyers. Then there's the other aspect of it is like, okay, now we have this. I mean, there's the things you can change and the things you can't change. So we're mad. We see the things that we can't change. That's there. Let's move on and focus on the things we can change. So this obstacle, how can this be an opportunity for us? So there's the brokerages that are gonna kind of like bury their head in the sand. And I even met somebody who used to work for us that was like, I'm not gonna teach on anything about the buyer broker. I'm just gonna tell my agents to get more listings. And I'm like, that's okay, I get that, but maybe we should be teaching our buyer's agents how to be better buyer's agents. And our company's always pushed a buyer broker. I was very in favor of the buyer broker agreement being mandatory in California, because I do think that when you have a contract with a person, just like you do when you have a listing agreement, it makes you a better realtor. You're going to get paid at some point, whereas like now It's, you know, a lot of agents are like, I'll meet you at the property on 123 Main Street at 5 o'clock. I never saw you before. I don't know who you are. I'm just going to meet the stranger, let them into the property. I mean, what kind of professional, you know, who does that in any other professional, you know, occupation? So I think that we need to train. We need to make sure that we have the most consumer-friendly buyer-broker agreement. And I know the states are going to put out their buyer-broker agreements, and I saw the one that CAR is putting out. I love CAR, don't get me wrong, but there's no way I'm going to have my agents use that buyer-broker, because we want a competitive buyer-broker agreement. We want something that when they're looking at buyer-broker agreements between different companies and who I'm going to work with, something that's consumer friendly, that lays out our competitive advantage, that says everything we're going to do for a client, and in exchange for everything we're going to do for you, we expect to get paid, and we will try to get that payment from the seller. So I think it needs to be short, sweet, to the point, not a CYA agreement. You could do the CYA agreement later, and very, very consumer friendly. So brokerages that I see being successful right now are doing a lot of training on buyer presentation, getting a very consumer-friendly buyer-broker agreement, and really using it as an opportunity, because there are companies out there that aren't doing anything, and their agents are looking. You know, they want to be with a company that's being forward-thinking and preparing and getting ready and doing things right now.
Michele, if I could, and Matt, before we get to Art, and Michele, there's a lot of upset people, angry people about what has taken place. And you know what? One of the funniest comedians of all time was a fellow by the name of Stephen Wright. I don't know if you remember him, but he did say 98.9% of the lawyers in this world are giving the rest a bad name. Okay. And you know, it's comical, but I sat in that courtroom in Kansas City, and as Ken said, you know, I thought that the case was just how it turned against us is beyond me. However, it did. Now with that, you know what? We have an opportunity. Last week, several brokers came up, but one broker in particular said to me at the meeting that this is an opportunity for a flight to excellence. Think about this. This is an opportunity for a flight to excellence. We are led by some great people, and the next fellow who's going to give his thoughts on this is Art Carter. And Art runs the largest, most progressive, incredible MLS in the United States. We've got strong backbones in this industry, strong technological partners, and we can fight and provide the consumer everything they're looking for and do it under this new normal. With that, Art, give us your thoughts.
Yeah, you know, obviously, you know, one of the main things that I've been dealing with, especially as Michele has said, is just a lot of anger and trying to diffuse that. I'm not a believer that you can steer the car by looking in the rearview mirror, and I'm just going to focus on going forward. And there is a path forward, and there is a very successful path forward for those individuals in this industry that can figure out these changes and, you know, work towards, you know, the positive. And the positive is putting the consumer in a much better position to understand exactly what's going on in their transaction, especially on the buy side. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, you know, I wouldn't have wished this to have occurred, but, you know, it's something that 5 years ago when these lawsuits first happened, and 6 years ago when I testified in front of the Department of Justice and the FTC, you kind of saw the writing on the wall. And we've been kind of doing as much as we can to skate to where that puck's going and figure out what the best method moving forward for everybody is. But I just was in an earlier meeting. I think, you know, Ken mentioned this is his third webinar this morning. This is my second. So, you know, I made a mention that people need to relax. There is life moving forward. This is not an extinction level event for you know, agents in our system. It's not an extinction level event for buyers agents. So, you know, somebody made the allegory about you know, different landscape. It's the same planet. It's just a different landscape. So I think people just need to recognize that this industry has gone through change on a regular basis, and some of these altering changes even 30 years ago, where the buyer's agent was a sub-agent of the selling side. Some of those dynamics have changed in a long period of time. Our problem is that we've got to convince Chicken Little that the sky is not falling. So that's not an easy process to go through.
Right. So let me just jump in here for a second, because what I've heard from all of us so far here is that there is some strong emotion, some anger, some frustration as to what happened, but it's time to channel that into some really productive outcomes. On one hand, it might be, as Ken said, that our legal system needs to be looked at in new ways that leaders in our industry could get involved in because of what has happened to us. Or as Michele says, there are things happening in the regulatory universe that we need to pay much more attention to. Endlessly in this industry, people ask, what is the value of our political action committees? We're starting to see why those things matter more than ever. And then, of course, as Art points out here, it's a different landscape, but it's travelable. It's basically the same rules. The gravity hasn't changed. We just need to update our navigation system. So all of that to me spells opportunity. I think of every time major changes have occurred in this business. I'm old enough to remember when we went from printed books to online, when we were worrying about banks coming into the business, then we worried about certain business models, then the portals, then a pandemic, then a lack of inventory. I mean, there's always something. And each time that's happened, this industry seems to have only gotten better and better and better. I remind everyone on this call that we never sold more homes in the last 30 years than during the pandemic. Okay, so if we can pull that off, and by the way, they even tried sending murder hornets after us during that time, if you remember those news articles. If we can pull that off, we can pull off a lot here. Let me go back to Art for a second. Art, one of the central aspects of what's about to happen in the new landscape is clearly some changes to how we use our most crucial business tool in this business, which is the MLS. I know that a lot of people have a lot of confusion around what this means for MLS, but I also know that you firmly believe that there's a single answer to the question, is this the death of MLS? And if so, then what? Tell us what people need to remember about how not only MLSs are going to deal with this, but how they will continue to be the foundation for great growth in this business in the future.
Yeah, the question of whether or not MLS is going to die as a result of this, my unequivocal answer is no. And obviously, I've got a vested interest in this to a certain extent, but I've got a vested interest as a consumer as well. And I think that the multiple listing service is the biggest gift that the brokerage community has ever given to the consumer. I firmly believe that. And as a consumer in the residential marketplace, I want to have access to all of the listings that are available within a footprint that I'm looking in. And the best way of doing that is cooperation between brokerages. And we're going to double down on cooperation within the MLS system. And we think that it's not just listing data that MLSs need to rely on going forward. We need to change our dynamic and start talking about data as a whole. I have a individual who works with our venture MLS side that has this analogy that if AI, artificial intelligence, is the new electricity for the industry, then data is going to be its oil. And the MLS is going to be that data provider that those AI, aspects can rely on.
I love that. And I love what you've also introduced here, which is a metaphor. You've introduced a way of thinking about what's happening that's optimistic, that's encouraging in that sense, and that the changes that are happening may be different, but different doesn't have to be worse. Different is often better. We love different. I love the differences in my modern automobile compared to the one I first learned to drive on. I love the differences in airline safety compared to 30 years ago. So different doesn't mean worse, which takes me back to Ken here for a second. Ken, one of the things that I know, we had a conversation before our discussion here today, but one of the things you brought up, which I think is really powerful, something that people need to think about, in the same way that Art is saying, there's a role for data, which it becomes the new oil in an AI empowered world. When you think about this, how do we also think about the communications, the currency around communications, how being able to really effectively communicate to consumers and to each other as colleagues really becomes the new currency for competitive advantages and for growth, becomes an opportunity to create new practices, to communicate and deliver new services to consumers, and possibly grow the business, not the opposite in this case.
Let me start by saying a couple of things. First of all, I think people take for granted the value of the MLS in quality control of data and how important it is that, this consistency, that there are rules, that when you go look at a property, it matches up with what the MLS is. And that's because of the rules. That's one valuable thing about the MLS that people, I think, take for granted. There are many valuable things, and that is going to be even more valuable in the future, as you know, with regard to AI, because all AI is doing is pulling from existing sources of information. And to be blunt, as a former New Yorker, if the information is crap, then the AI is going to produce crap. And so you need to have quality going in, as we used to say when I was a kid, garbage in, garbage out. So it's super important there. With regard to communication, I think this has kind of forced people to kind of wake up and take a look at the industry, but people have been improving this. Firms like Michele have been improving the consumer experience for years and years and years. My members offer mortgage services, title services, one-stop shopping. There's a lot. I think there'll be more of that being offered to consumers as part of the value proposition, and that's on the buyer side. So I think there's opportunities there, and working together to kind of communicate what is being done for consumers and what is available for them, and and kind of tooting one's own horn in some ways about how you're helping folks, I think is all for the best. I think a lot of people kind of took things for granted. The person running to some house to unlock a door because they're so busy with other things. Well, maybe they were taking things for granted. This industry really has been about developing lifelong relationships with people, so that 25 years from now, the person you sold a house to is going to list their house with you because they remember you and the great job you did and your presence in the community, and all those kinds of things. And I think it's just a matter of building on that and putting that in the forefront. I think it happens already. Anytime we're in a market where there's only 4.5 million sales, people up their game a bit. But I think this is going to force more of that. And I think firms like Michele's firm are well positioned to do, because they have been doing it for a long time. It's just it goes under the radar and stuff like that. But I think that's what brokers are going to need to do, and they're going to need to insist upon a level of quality from their agents, at a higher level. And I think they have been, and they've wanted to do it, and they've tried to push that. But I think it'll happen even more. I think that'll be part of the outcome here.
If I could, I want to step in for a second, and I want to make a couple of quick points. Number one, the value is something that we've been providing the consumer for many, many years. And on the buyer side, we're just getting better and going to get even much better at providing the buyer with full transparency and the services that they need to be successful in accomplishing their own personal goals and objectives for real estate. But I have a question. I have a question for our audience today. My question is very simple. Are you finding this discussion informative and potentially beneficial to your business? If you are, I'd like you to do the following. If you like the discussion, if it's useful, please make sure that you take a look at and join RISMedia's premier news service, because it'll keep you objectively informed as to everything that's transpiring in our industry and on the most important issues facing your business. I ask you to do this because it's your membership that makes these conversations and these sessions possible. There's a discount code on your screen right now that you'll be able to receive $50 off of your Premier membership. Please take a look at it. I have one more important note. If you are enjoying today's session, please look for an email from me. It's an invitation that's going to provide you access to our 36th annual RISmedia's CEO and Leadership Exchange, September 4th through 6th at the beautiful Mayflower Hotel in Washington, D.C. Our CEO Exchange has more than 25 different thought-provoking educational sessions just like the one you're in right now. And they're incredibly run by some of the most incredible brokerage leaders and other thought leaders in our industry every single year. You'll be joined by hundreds of folks coming to Washington, all trying to invest in their future by getting together with the leaders that are moving our industry in the right direction. So see you in September in Washington, D.C. Now let's get back to our session. Matt, take us away.
Thanks, John. And I appreciate the reminder, especially for CEO Exchange. It is a tremendous event. Everyone who's possible to make it really should be there. Just like we're talking about today, it's one of those moments every year that continues to provide an accelerant to our growth. Let me go over to Michele here for a moment. So Michele, Art and Ken both sort of talked about new forces that will empower growth in the future. Art's, reminding us that the kind of data that MLSs have are just barely scratching the surface. Most brokers are barely scratching the surface of that. Obviously looking for what's happening in listings and sales, but there's so many more connections to be made that could empower new training, new business models, new types of service propositions to the consumer. And then Ken reminds us that the way that data is valuable is how it is different than other forms of data, the quality of it, the fact that it is well managed, easily accessible, and can empower brokerages and therefore agents to be able to innovate in unforeseen ways in this business. Talk to us about what First Team is doing. Talk to us about the ways in which you're using data. You're using these opportunities that are right there in our MLS today, and not so much worrying about what's going to happen with the changes in the MLS in the future, but already using it to get ahead of those, to either prep your agents or attract new talent, or even identify potential new partners in the business, maybe using it for merger and acquisition conversations where you and other firms can obviously combine your efforts and your innovations and your thoughts to who knows, potentially create even more value for the consumer going forward. Tell us how you're thinking about that leading First Team.
Yeah, so I think we look a lot at agent business metrics. Our company we're not the cheapest game in town for the agents to work for. So they expect a lot more from us than what they're gonna get at maybe somewhere else. So our managers and the way we run our company is we're big on coaching and building an agent's business, building their team. So, and the only way to really do that is to know where we're at. So how do you know where you're at? You need, analytics. You need to find out what their listing effectiveness is, what their farming, how effective they are in their farm, how, what their average commission rate is, what their average GCI per year is, where do they want to be at? So you need these tools and these systems, and we get all that data from the MLS. And then we use that data to coach our agents and to coach our teams and to build our teams. And we also use the data to recruit with, because we'll look at the data and we'll say, oh, this team or this agent has been trending down over the past 2 years. There's something wrong with their business. They need our help. So let's reach out and say, hey, what's going on? I feel like you could benefit from our coaching and our systems and our training. So we use data a lot when it comes to really focusing on the agent's business and how we can help them and how we can bring in agents that need our help. And also, like you said, mergers and acquisitions. I mean, same with companies and large teams. If we see a company that's trending down, I mean, we've all trended down the past couple of years, but maybe they're trending down a little bit more than the MLS, aggregation is. and we can look at them and say, there's something going on here. We use MLS data and some, third-party aggregators to kind of get us like, if there's a migration of agents out of one company into another company, we can see all that. And that's really helpful to us too, to see if a company's in trouble. And then same thing, you approach that company and maybe they need us right now, and maybe this is a good fit for us. So I think MLS data is really, really important to look at it, to analyze it, to see who your next team is going to be, how your teams are doing, because if your teams are trending down or your agents are trending down, then there's other people that are going to be targeting them. So definitely we use that data for all that.
I love how you position that for us, because in a sense, it's the classic story of when one door closes, another one opens, right? And unless you're Boeing, where you really don't want that to happen, it generally is a good business evolution. Just no picking on you, Boeing. But all right, let me go to you here for a second on the same thought. Right now, people are obsessing about what they're going to lose. They may lose a field in MLS. They may lose a practice of communicating information in a certain way. And yet, as we've just heard from Michele, and as you alluded to earlier, there's still plenty to gain. There's still plenty of opportunity here. Now, I want to try and get specific. I would love for you to talk to us a little bit about the other kinds of data that you not only are seeking, but you already have, at least in your MLS, and many of the finest MLSs that I know out there are equally positioned to create new connections, new business model potential, new opportunities out there. Let's talk about the kinds of data that agents could be and brokers could be looking at now during this sort of honeymoon period before they actually lose anything, because they necessarily haven't lost anything in every instance yet, so that they will already be beyond the fear of loss towards the potential for gain.
Yeah, obviously, there's some elements when I talk about doubling down on cooperation. Really interested in that crack, that data crack in between a listing and a listing going pending. And some of those data points, the velocity information that we're talking about out in the industry, giving Michele some of those ideas of the performance of a certain listing against other listings in the marketplace that are active at the same time. How many lockbox openings is she getting versus, the other properties in the neighborhood? How many offers? There's just so many different pieces of information that brokerages can aggregate together and provide a lot more information to manage their agent base and their business possibilities as they move forward. I'm a firm believer that that there's so much that can be collected at this point that's not being collected. It sits on a whiteboard in my office. It's this saying that says that we will collect everything, and my staff often ask me, what does everything mean? And I said, I think everything is pretty all-inclusive. Anything that we think is important to the brokerage community that they're willing to share with each other, we're going to collect. And we're going to provide that intelligence back to the brokerage community in a way that they want to consume it, whether it's taking it in and consuming it themselves, or providing some reporting back out to them through some broker intelligence modules that are coming shortly. So I think there's just so much more that can be done with the data, and that it's to the net benefit of our brokerage community.
So, I think of this as that classic business case story. Some people may remember many years ago where we actually paid for long distance calls, and the phone companies used to call us and ask us to switch long distance providers, right? Switch over to Sprint or AT&T or to wherever to save some money. And the classic business story was that in one of the call centers for one of the large companies, they would track how many conversion opportunities were made on a customer. So what they discovered was that most of their call people gave up trying to convert someone to their system around the 7th call, the 7th time they made that phone call. And then they analyzed at what call the majority of their conversions occurred, which was the 8th call. So like they were so close on the vast majority of their effort. And Art, what you're saying to me is like, there are so many pieces of data that the MLS is and will be tracking and mobilizing and making it possible for people to say, these price points are more effective with our training and value proposition. This pace of selling homes is better for our cash flow and better for our profitability. These consumers resonate more with our brand and our culture and our competitive approach, as Michele was saying, right, in terms of what we're offering for what we're asking. So that kind of opportunity, I feel as if almost this moment in time, this settlement is making us recognize that while we were only selling our favorite vegetable in the garden, there's all these vegetables for us to sell. Like we just need to look around and decide, let's use this opportunity not to be sad that something's going away, but to be excited to have had our focus brought towards things that could help us grow. Now that takes me back to Ken here for a second. So Ken, I want to ask you sort of a variation on this, if you will, right? So let's talk about value proposition to consumers. Let's talk about what Michele is doing and what Art is doing. Art's creating this great fertile ground for innovation. Michele is saying, I want to take a look at this from new perspectives and new angles and get my agents involved in trying to mobilize this. When you think of this, do you see this as a moment in time where, again, we might look back and say, hey, you know, this is what finally propelled one-stop models to be the norm. This is what propelled using technology in innovative ways to be, you know, even more embraced than our industry already has. You know, we know that there's still always a little bit of reluctance there. Or a new conversation, a new way of talking to consumers that is less susceptible to, let's just say, misinformation by the press or something like that. Do you see this as sort of like an innovation moment that's just beginning, just blooming, and that the settlements, again, might have just been a tripwire that we needed and didn't know that we needed?
Well, look, I think that we're seeing this is, I think, you know, with anything, whether it's a sports team or, you know, even in our own lives, you get lulled into a certain sense of security with doing things the same way. And then something happens that forces you to improve or up your game or do something a little different. I mean, I was thinking about when Art was talking about what could I do if I knew, if I was about to list a house and I knew that 2 or 3 houses in that same neighborhood had, like, you know, 15 people check them out, or, you know, that there was, that tells me there's a lot of folks looking in that neighborhood, and that maybe I can up my price a little bit and I'll catch a bigger fish for my client, rather than just say, well, that house sold for you know, 250,000, so I'm going to make you list yours for 250. Well, 12 people went and looked at that house in a week, and someone bought it for 250. Well, you know what? I'm going to say your house is almost the same. Why don't you put 260 or 265? Let's give that a shot. I think we got a shot at that. You know, and that's a very micro example of what I think, you know, people are going to be doing on a macro level here in order to say, look, this is what I'm doing for this. You know, we used to take for granted that people just accepted, and now there's been a variable has changed. There's people hear about this settlement, and some people are being told that they don't even have to pay commissions and all that. And people are going to need to explain, you know, why they do things the way they do it, and what they can offer people. And like I said, you know, my members, I always say this to be fair, because I spent 10 years working with NAR. You know, my members do one-stop shopping. Firms like Michele's, you know, can offer mortgage, closing, all kinds of insurance services and stuff like that. But even individual agents and small brokers do that informally with their recommendations. So you can offer it. You don't have to be at the very top to do all these things in some way, shape, or form. I think my members probably do it more efficiently and effectively. But, you know, everyone can do this type of thing, and it's part of giving somebody more value. Not that they have to use these services, but that they know that they're there. Because we learned this in all these regulatory changes like TRID and stuff like that. That, you know, consumers are not focused on They don't want to spend 8 hours learning about title insurance in order to save $25. They just want your recommendation because they need to figure out how they're going to move and what day and and what interest rate they need to and what their mortgage payment's going to be, and those are the things that they're focused on. Not every little thing like that, but all of those things need to be taken care of, and that's where all of us come in that we are there to explain to them why hey, we've got your back on this stuff, and if you want to use our services, great, or we can make a recommendation for third parties and stuff like that. But that's part of the value we give you. That's our expertise. That's why you're hiring us. This is still the most complicated transaction almost any person will be engaged in, and we're here for them. We're here for you. We were before, and we'll continue to be. And here's what we have to offer you. And I think that that's really how this evolves. And it's just a matter of, instead of we're just saying it again.
Right.
We're forced to say it again.
If I could, very well said, Ken. If I could, I want to inject a couple of things and throw it out to the crowd and get your opinions back. Lennox Scott, one of the most dynamic leaders in our industry from the Pacific Northwest. His family, I think, has been in business ever since Lewis and Clark first went to Seattle. Okay. And one of the things Lennox said last week to me, he said, there's never been more important time in our industry than for skill mastery. Really, skills count more than ever. And I'd like to add something else in. He said, it's time to really take a deep dive into whether you have a firm. Michele, you mentioned most firms have 3 people. Okay. And there are a lot of great small firms out there. They don't have necessarily the resources to really expand, but they're going to get on board and train the 3 agents that are with them on how to compete in today's market, or they stand a good chance of losing those agents, because agents in today's market, either they want to succeed and they're going to gravitate towards the safe haven, strong platforms, so there's opportunities for brokers to expand. There's another great broker, Rod Messick, has a huge organization in Pennsylvania. And Rod, talking about this event today, said, John, that right now we have a lot of fear out there in the marketplace. Courage is not a lack of fear, he said. Courage is being scared as hell and not taking action. Okay. And you know what? Why everyone that's on this call right now, the hundreds of people listening in, want to know, what should they do? They can't sit back and wait for things to happen. They have to make things happen. From a brokerage standpoint, Michele, and also Art, from your standpoint of leading a CRMLS, okay, what are your recommendations of getting in front of your members, or in Michele's case, your agents? Because money follows value. Agents want to produce, but they want to be associated with organizations that are helping them create value. Michele, how are you helping your agents in these trying times hone their value, improve their value, so they can make more money?
Yeah, John, it's all about training. I mean, we have to get back to the basics and training our agents how to be better at their jobs. And, we developed like I talked about, our buyer broker agreement, a better buyer presentation. We always had a buyer presentation. Now your buyer presentation has to be better than your listing presentation. If your buyer presentation isn't better than your listing presentation, you need to rework it. And if you're a broker and you're not doing these things, then the agents are going to do them on their own. And then why do they need you? So we're needed right now. The brokers that focus on the training, the kind of, I want to say traditional, maybe more traditional brokers, that we're needed right now. This is like a glory time for us, because, they could go to a renter broker place, or they could be somewhere where they're going to get help, they're going to get training, they're going to get a buyer presentation, they're going to get a new buyer broker agreement. There's a lot of value we can bring. When houses are flying off the shelves and anybody with a pulse can sell, 12 houses a year, they don't need us. They don't need us then. They need us now. So there is a lot of opportunity with this obstacle to really be valuable to your agents and show them the way. So I definitely think, like, training continuously. We set up a 10-week training on just the buyer presentation and working with buyers and buyer broker agreements. I mean, and we're constantly doing it, and we're still doing it. And
that's a 10-week program. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I didn't set it up. I have great people that work in the organization. So Jacob Lawler set it up. He's the head of our training. Yeah. And he said, I want to do a 10-week program where we're talking about what a buyer's agent needs to be, how they need to present, how they need to work with buyers, what their agreement should look like, how they present that agreement, what their narrative is, what their value proposition is. And we went way, way, way deep on that. And we had hundreds of agents that went to that, and it was very, very effective. And they come out empowered. I mean, because if fear is what they're feeling right now, then you have to get over, help them get over their fear. You need to empower them. And training and learning, if they feel confident, that's going to empower them.
So let me jump in there, because I'd love to take that same question and ask Art for his perspective on both the same types of communication that Michele is training her agents to do with consumers. Let's just translate that into MLS executives, MLS volunteer boards. I work a lot with the MLSs, with CMLS, and I know how much effort has gone into helping all of the great MLSs in the country have a strong talk track, clear understanding of what their value proposition is, being able to communicate it not between MLSs, but obviously to members, and having those board members out there having proactive conversations both with other stakeholders, and to some degree that is going to trickle out into the public. Let's talk about that for a moment. What are some of the sort of key opportunities there? Because that's a whole level of industry leadership that is, I think, being activated at this moment.
Yeah, I think, my recommendation to, the volunteer leaders and my fellow CEOs out there is you got to communicate. If you don't feel comfortable getting out there and talking about this and talking about this and talking about this, find somebody that is, because you have an absolute obligation to your membership to talk to them. At the end of the day, what's going to happen, August 18th is a big date. That's the date that commission's coming out of the multiple listing service, and it's going to happen. And I hope to God that I can do everything that I can do to stop it from happening, but somebody's going to come to a closing table and not get paid. And at the end of the day, it's because somebody didn't pay attention. The fact that I'm still doing presentations, and as soon as I'm done with this, I'm getting in my car and going to do another one at 1 o'clock. So at the end of the day, RDR, realtors don't read, but at this point, I've been telling people that they've got to get themselves educated. This will be a summer of education for them, and they've got to get their arms around all of these changes, to everything that's occurring in the industry. Or we will face that situation where, through inaction, through inactivity, through not educating yourself, that there's going to be an unsavory outcome to a transaction. And the good news is that they'll learn it one time, and a one time only, but that's a very expensive and painful lesson to learn.
Right. I love that that sense of being proactive and encouraging our volunteer boards and our MLS leadership to be as proactive as possible. Obviously, we've all done some meetings, but this is one of those areas where you reach a small percentage of your stakeholders, then you have to reach another percentage of your state. Like, this is something we're going to be talking about, and still right up to the deadline. As you said, some people will wake up that morning and say, wait, something has happened. I didn't quite follow that. I think this is also true for the consumer. We often worry about internally what's going to happen to our industry, but the typical buyer or seller has the typical seller has a 10-year tenure in their home right now. They're spending 10 years in their current home, which means that more than half of them are spending 12, 14, 16 years in their home just to get to this 10-year average across the nation. this is something where we're all paying a lot of attention. All the brokers and MLS executives and industry executives and agents are paying attention to, but the vast majority of the public, I'm only 5 million sales a year. So 5 million consumers know what's going on because they're thinking about real estate right now. And in America, there's 340 other million Americans who are going about their lives. A year from now, these things are going to be new to an entire new crop of people who wasn't reading these headlines this year, et cetera. So a question for Ken here, maybe as we head towards wrapping up, how would you encourage our viewers to plan to sustain this communication strategy, to sustain the need to consistently express and articulate value, to talk about not necessarily how things are different or changed, but how there are new opportunities because of what we'll be doing this year to innovate and grow and stimulate new value propositions. How do people plan to sustain that communication sort of as the new normal going forward?
So I say don't be afraid of repeating yourself, because, and I learned this during the tread period. I did a video that was viral for NAR. It had 50,000 views on YouTube. It's a lot of views back then. This is, almost 10 years ago. That was still less than 5% of NAR members if it was just NAR members. So you can't assume that people have heard these things. And so what I like to do is, for my own sanity, I will continue repeating the message, but I'll refresh it, as new information comes in, add new examples and things like that. But don't feel like just because you've been saying the same thing for 6 months, everyone's heard it, especially as these folks realize. I mean, it's a huge danger. I see this in Washington when I do lobbying and stuff like that, is you can't assume that other people know what you know about your business at all. And so you shouldn't be afraid to repeat yourself, essentially.
I love it. Awesome.
And dumb things down too. I don't like that term because it's not, people are not experts in everything. We're not experts in everything. You know what I'm saying? So, you keep it simple. And if somebody shows that they seem to know something, then you can take it up to the next level. But otherwise, keep your messages simple and understandable, and find good examples and use examples too. I think they always help with people. Relatable examples. So your mom and dad bought their house when, and if they remember that and stuff like, that kind of a thing, make things relatable and in that way, and use examples.
And I'm thinking that people like Michele, for example, are using examples of agents who are already successful doing buyer brokerage agreements to show to their peers that this is doable. It actually improved their business, reduced the amount of customers that they might have been working with who weren't actually qualified or motivated. Like, they could actually show the positive business benefits of this. And people like Art are able to take this same idea and be able to say, and here's where innovation is occurring amongst our stakeholders, and highlight stakeholders who are doing some fun, interesting, clever things, or even new stakeholders who are becoming involved in our industry because they realize how deep a pot of gold is in the MLS. We only have a couple of minutes here before we have to wrap up. I'm going to pass it back to John, who might have some thoughts, and then maybe ask all of you for one last quick comment. John?
I thank you. First of all, great job, Matt, and everyone. The couple of quick thoughts, and I want to go back for a real quick speed round with everyone. Number one, I think we'd all agree that there's no more pressing need than education in our industry right now. And if you're a broker watching this right now, learn from Michele. Get out there. Don't sit. Get out there. Show your leadership. Come up with a plan and educate your agents as to what they should be doing, because we're in a flight for excellence right now. Skill mastery is the most important thing you can be providing for your agents right now so they can succeed. Education and being confident in what they do. Now, let's go back to everyone on the panel and give us your quick wrap up in the next 30, 60, 90 days, max. What are the two most important things you think our readers should be doing? Let's start with Art.
My apologies. Educate yourself. I can't reiterate that over and over again. Educate yourself and be prepared to educate your agents. Chart a course for knowing exactly what you're going to do with your forms, like Michele talked about with the buyer broker representation agreements. Chart a course and communicate it as much as you possibly can. As Ken said, simplify and repeat.
Great. Ken?
Yeah, I mean, I just echo that and what Michele said earlier. I think you really need to have your materials together. And to the point you're making, agents and brokers haven't always been the best of friends, but the agents are looking to their brokers here to lead. And so you can show them your value by giving them what they need to get through this time. And then, you will have, very loyal agents, and successful agents.
Michele?
I think being very vocal. I've spoken more in the past, like how long, 6 months, and I talk so much now, and I'm not a talker normally. So it's speaking, it's being vocal, it's getting out in front of your agents and the industry, because our PACs need to get really serious about what's going on so we can prevent things like this from destroying the industry in the future. So we need to be leaders in our brokerage to our agents, being positive, showing them the way, and then we need to be really vocal in the industry, so the industry is looking out for the industry, not looking out for pet projects. So yeah, those are what I think we need to do.
Michele, you're absolutely right. This is not the end, I don't think. There's other stuff going on, and people need to up their game in Washington and at the state level as well. It's part of what we do at RESPRO. It's what NAR does. It's very important. I'm glad you mentioned it.
And you're doing a great job. Matt, your thoughts wrapping up.
Yeah, my quick thoughts wrapping up is I think this is an opportunity for us to all practice 3 simple conversations. At the one-to-one level, we should be having one-to-one conversations with all of our agents and making sure that they're all prepared, informed, understand the resources and opportunities at their disposal, and on a plan to use the summer as a great incubation period for growth. We should be having one-to-one conversations with consumers. We should be speaking just to our spheres of influence. Imagine if 1.5 million realtors all called one consumer a day, how much positive influence we would have on the mind of the public right now. And then having one-to-one conversations with colleagues around us that we see are struggling. Don't use this as an opportunity to say, oh, well, too bad for them, this is my gain. Use this as an opportunity to do what we do best in this business, which is to reach out a helping hand to someone who's struggling and give them an opportunity to grow with you through this. Together, we will be able to create unbelievable progress going forward.
I love all 4 of your insights. I thank you for the bottom of our hearts here at RISMedia. I'll leave you with one final note. We all must be positive that what we're going to do going forward is going to help the buyers, the sellers, our friends and our neighbors achieve their real estate goals and objectives. And we are who they should be turning to because we can help them achieve their goals. Thank you very, very much. I look forward to seeing all of you in September in Washington, D.C. And by the way, we have 2 special networking nights planned for you. So there'll be plenty of time to get together with hundreds of your colleagues and get to know each other even better. Continued success. Thank you, Art. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Michele. And thank you, Matt.
Thank you, John. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, John. Great job, everyone.
Thank you, Matt.
My pleasure.